Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 7, Consciousness and Awareness, Part 1. So this section, this chapter, is about ideas of consciousness and also about emotions and other things that might change that idea of consciousness. All right? So particularly, we're going to talk about several things. Emotions is going to be a big thing that we could talk about, but we're also going to talk about ideas of misattribution of arousal in emotions and the effects of drugs and how drugs work in the synapse. So those are the main things that we're going to discuss in this particular chapter. All right, here's some things we're going to do, but let's go ahead and get straight into it right now. Here's the first question. Which of these is an emotion? All right, now, the way you answer this kind of depends on several different things. Okay, so some people really believe that love is an emotion, and some people really believe that other things are emotions. Some things are pretty easy to understand. Like normally, anger is something that people are going to say is definitely an emotion. Now, by the way, if you ask me, I don't think love is just an emotion. We'll talk about that a little bit later in a different chapter. But defining an emotion is actually a difficult thing. Emotion is a form of affect. Remember, ABCs of psychology: affect, behavior, cognition. Well, affect includes all the feeling states, and emotion is just one of those. Whoops, going back. There it is. We're going to define emotion as a temporary affective state that involves a physiological state. You're like, what? That doesn't make any sense. All right, just hear me out on this one. Imagine that you are sad, okay? You are sad and you can kind of see what's happening. You're actually physically crying, etc. Emotions are not like a mood, which can be a long, long time. Emotions tend to be relatively short. So, for example, you're probably not going to actually be crying for literally 24 hours. If you are, I feel bad for you. But generally, we don't do that. In terms of an affective state, that's relatively temporary. It's only a few hours long at the most. Anger, same idea, right? Just, you feel like that only just for a few hours. Surprise, perhaps, maybe fear. You're probably not going to experience the actual physical sensation of like shaking fear for, days and weeks on end. Generally, emotions are relatively temporary, if nothing else, because you got to go to sleep, right? And you can't literally cry while you're sleeping. You can cry yourself to sleep, but you stop crying when you're sleeping, generally. All right, so emotions are temporary affective states that involve a physiological state. So something like love is a lot more difficult to figure out. Hey, is love just a temporary affective state and then it stops if your heart doesn't beat fast? Is that what's going on? Makes it more complicated. There are some emotions, however, that are pretty universally recognized as emotions. And we're going to start with basic emotions. So I want you to look at this picture. This is a picture of pictures, and tell me, what emotion is person one experiencing? Person one is experiencing anger. It's pretty easy for us to figure out that that person right there is angry. Why? Because she has a physiological state. In this case, her facial expression is a physiological change that allows her to experience the emotion. You should be able to look at these and pretty much figure out what everybody is actually experiencing, right? So, person one is anger, person two is fear, person three, if we're going across on the top, person three is disgust. Down at the next level, person four, that is surprise. Person five is happiness, and person six is sadness. Now, some of those sound pretty familiar to you if you've watched the Pixar movie Inside Out. The only one that's not a part of that is surprise. Fear is there, but not surprise. That's because when they made that movie, they actually talked to a researcher named Paul Ekman, and Paul Ekman is the main guy in basic emotions. And these are the 6 basic emotions that we started with. But let me talk to you about, before we get to Ekman, about somebody else that came before Ekman. And that somebody else is named Charles Darwin. So Charles Darwin, you've heard of him, actually had a theory that facial expressions are evolutionarily passed on, that you're born with these facial expressions. And he thought that, a kid is just born that way so that they can express their emotions and be more social, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is that Charles Darwin really didn't have the resources to test this against a cultural perspective. The cultural perspective would say that you understand how to experience an emotion by watching other people, right? So in my culture, when people are angry, they go like this, right? That would be a cultural explanation. Well, Darwin was saying, no, 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 no. When people go like this, that's because their instincts tell them they're born with the trait that when you experience emotion, your facial expression naturally does that. Well, years and years and years later, there's this guy named Paul Ekman, and Paul Ekman said, "Hey, let's go ahead and test this thing out. Let's look at facial expression." So what he did is these pictures are Paul Ekman's pictures of facial expressions. These are not expressions where they said, "Look angry." They didn't say, "Look angry for me," or "Look surprised," or "Look happy," or "Look whatever." They said, all right, I want you to move this muscle exactly like this, and I want you to move this muscle right here, and move this muscle right here. And they actually looked at it on a muscular level so that people would not be biased in the way that they put their face, right? They had them actually change the individual muscles. Then they took pictures. There were more than these 6 that they took. But remember, here's what they need to do. They need to find a way to show that these facial expressions are inborn, they're instinctual. They're inherited rather than culturally learned. So the way they did it was by taking pictures and many more to Papua New Guinea, and they found a tribe in Papua New Guinea who had extremely limited, very little, if any, experience with Western culture. So an isolated tribe in Papua New Guinea, and what they did is they showed them these pictures. And they said, how do you feel? How is this person feeling? And then they also gave them scenarios. Hey, if somebody stole something from you, which one of these would you feel, etc. And what they found based off of those studies was that there were 6 basic emotions. There were 6 emotions that were universally recognized. They were experienced even by people who did not have cultural interactions with Americans or other Western culture. And so when people felt anger, they made the angry face. And it didn't matter what culture you came from. These are basic emotions because you were born with them. They're inborn. You don't have to learn anything. You're born with these as an instinct, as a reflex, automatic. These are basic emotions. Now, over time, Paul Ekman actually increased this to one more, and that's contempt. So there's actually 6 basic emotions originally, and then they added one more that was contempt later on, finding that across cultures, people would recognize these as the actual facial expressions you make. The other way that you get evidence for this is that babies also tend to make these facial expressions. So do people who were born blind. Now remember that this is the alternative explanation would be a cultural understanding, right? We learn to smile when we're happy because the culture shows us that. Well, it turns out that people who are blind smile when they're happy, even though they were born blind. They've never seen anyone smile before. So this is evidence that these are basic. These are inborn. You don't have to do anything to learn them. And as such, they do a very good job of communicating how we are feeling. So, for example, you can see this in cartoon characters, but there also seems to be evidence that you can see these in other primates, where it's pretty easy to figure out, happiness, anger, fear, and sadness. Now, this leads us to the next part of it, which is you should know that sometimes you feel sad, but your face says happy. Meaning, even though you want to be sad, you change your face. You mask your emotion and put on a happy face, even when you're sad. So what's going on there? Well, let's go ahead and watch this video, and we will talk about it. So in that video, you saw Paul Ekman talking about a concept called micro expressions. Now remember, these particular expressions are automatic or inborn. They're basic emotions, meaning you don't have to learn anything. That means that they're instinctual and they happen automatically. Well, what happens over time is you learn that those facial expressions communicate stuff. And so you learn that if I want to communicate happiness, I can't make the sad face. And you learn to mask how you're actually feeling. Well, Paul Ekman took this, and by the way, he was one of the consultants for the TV show Lie to Me, which these are photos of the actor from Lie to Me, who were talking about being able to see lies based off of micro expressions. And Paul Ekman really does have a program where he says that, hey, if these are really instinctual, automatic, you can't stop them, expressions, then even if you want to lie, you have to exhibit a micro expression. You have to exhibit the real facial expression of how you actually feel, at least for a fraction of a second, a micro expression. Now, I want to make sure that I'm clear about this. I am not telling you that now that you've looked at this, you're going to be able to tell whenever anybody's lying. I don't think that's true. In fact, it's a little more complicated. Generally, when we're talking about these, we're talking about having a videotape of somebody and you like freeze frame when they would be changing their expression. That would be what we're talking about with micro expressions. But the idea is based on instinctual, automatic, without being able to control it, automatic facial expressions happening, and then you mask it, and then you mask it to how you're actually feeling. And if you can see the original micro expression, you can tell how people are actually feeling. All right, let's move on. We need to talk about a separate concept, and this is called self-awareness. Now, this is going to get back to emotions in just a little bit, but self-awareness is not something that you are born with. Remember, basic emotions are basic because you're born that way. You're born with the instinct of smiling when you're happy, frowning when you're sad, all that stuff, okay? Self-awareness is not something you're born with. It is not basic. Self-awareness is the understanding that you are a separate entity from other members of your own species, or anything else for that matter, right? So the most common test for this is the mirror test. And so what you do is you take whatever the organism is, and we're talking about animals almost always in this case, or a child, and you put a mark on their face without them knowing it. So generally this is makeup of some form, and you put a mark on their forehead or their nose or their cheek. And then you put them in front of a mirror. Animals or people who have self-awareness will reach to their own face to brush off or to see what's going on. That indicates they're aware that I am separate from the image that I see in the mirror, okay? I am a unique individual entity. You can do this with other animals as well, and certain animals will pass the mirror test and certain animals won't. So there's lots of videos online of animals passing or not passing. Now, an animal that does not have self-awareness, what will they do? Well, one thing they might do is they'll try and wipe the makeup or the mark off of that guy over there, which is the mirror, right? Or sometimes they will run away scared of whoever they see, or they might try and attack themselves in the mirror, right? Because they don't know it's themselves. They're not self-aware. Now, self-awareness is beyond the idea of just I'm a different entity from other members of my own species. It's the awareness of your own body, your own experience and sense in physical space, that you are separate and not connected with other things in your environment as well. Go ahead and watch this video for an example of that. So in this video, the child was showing self-awareness if they understood that their body, my entity, my separate entity, was having effect on the carpet, right? Having an effect on the carpet, which was tied to the shopping cart, and so I couldn't move the shopping cart. This is a different way that we can measure self-awareness in children. Now, what's important here, though, is that we are not born with that idea of self-awareness. We're not born with the understanding that I am a unique, separate entity, different from other members of my own species, different from other things in my environment. And that means that I have to learn that. It is not basic. It's not inborn. All right, let's keep going. Besides self-awareness, there's also a concept called theory of mind. The theory of mind is when you have a theory that I have a mind. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm saying that If I have a theory of mind, I understand I have the theory that you have a mind of your own. You have a separate point of view. You have a separate way of looking at things. Now, this is not the same as self-awareness, because self-awareness is where I just understand that I'm separate. Now, whether or not I'm a separate entity, okay? Now, whether or not we have the same information and process the information the same way, that's a different thing. That's the theory of mind. So let's look at the Sally Ann task, and this is probably the most well-known task of testing whether or not somebody has a theory of mind. Okay, now, in that video that you just watched, who has the theory of mind in the Sally Ann task? Who has the theory of mind? Who is being tested? The child is being tested. It's not whether Sally has a theory of mind or whether Anne has a theory of mind. It's whether the child watching the story about Sally and Anne has an understanding that Sally and Anne each have unique and separate points of view. Okay? If the kid knows that these characters have their mind of their own, then they know that they're not going to have all the information, right? They're not going to know that things were moved when they're not present. If a child does not have theory of mind developed yet, then they're going to assume that everyone, including the characters in the scenario, have the same information that they have. Okay. Another way that you look at theory of mind is through deception tasks. So think about it. Theory of mind is understanding that other people, other entities, have a mind of their own, have their own point of view. You can test whether or not they have a theory of mind, not just with Sally Ann, but also with deception tasks. If you can deceive someone, then you have to have developed a theory of mind, understanding that they have their own point of view, and therefore they're going to do certain things. And if you're actively trying to deceive them, you understand that they have a theory of mind. That means that you must have developed a theory of mind. So let's look at the Woodruff and Premack study, which looks for theory of mind in chimpanzees. All right, so here's how this goes. You got a chimpanzee. Chimpanzee is inside a cage. Outside of the cage is two boxes. All right. A banana is put in one of the boxes. Okay. A banana is put in one of the boxes. And then the person who put the banana in the box goes away. In comes someone we're going to call the good researcher. This is not the person who put the banana in the box. This is somebody new. Okay. This researcher has learned to communicate, right? The chimpanzee has been trained to communicate with the researcher, right? In this particular case, they're asking which box has the banana. Now remember, the chimpanzee is in a cage and cannot reach out and grab the banana himself, otherwise probably do that, right? So in this case, the researcher is the only one who can actually access the banana, but the chimpanzee knows where the banana is. So the researcher asks, where's the banana? The chimpanzee points to where the banana is, and the researcher shares the banana with the chimpanzee. Okay, this is the good researcher. Got it? There's a separate researcher. Okay, the banana is put back in the box by somebody else. In comes the bad researcher. Do the same thing. They say, where's the banana? The chimpanzee points to the box with the banana in it, but this time, oh, that mean researcher, he just ate that banana himself. He didn't share it at all. Okay, turns out chimpanzee doesn't like this. They do this several times, good researcher, bad researcher, etc. Over time, after they do this test several times, pretty soon, the chimpanzee, instead of pointing to the box with the banana in it, points to the other box. The researcher looks in that other box, doesn't find a banana, and walks away. When the good researcher comes in, that's when the chimpanzee points to the correct box and gets the banana. The chimpanzee is obviously actively trying to deceive the bad researcher. Not the good researcher, because he'll point to the banana, the box with the banana in it, when the good researcher is in town. But when this bad researcher's coming, he's going to point to the wrong box in order to actively deceive that bad researcher. That means that the chimpanzee has a theory of mind. The chimpanzee has a theory that the bad researcher has a mind of his own, right? Doesn't share all the same information about where the banana is. Therefore, the chimpanzee has also developed a theory of mind. All right, now, why does this all matter? Number one, question. Are self-awareness and theory of mind the same thing? No. No, they're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. You have to have self-awareness before you can have a theory of mind. Self-awareness is the awareness that you are a unique individual, that you are a separate entity, right? Think like that your actual person, your physical presence, is separate from other people and things, or other animals for that matter, right? You are a unique individual. But that does not include that you have a mind of your own. The theory of mind is, if I understand I'm a unique individual, I also need to understand that other people do not have all the information that I have in my mind. Our minds are different. It's a theory that other people have a mind of their own, have an understanding, a point of view, a mind of their own. You have to have self-awareness first, then theory of mind. These are developed. You are not born with them. And this is a reason why we are going to separate the basic emotions from moral or social emotions. Now, these four examples are not the only moral or social emotions that are out there. There's other ones. But if you think about it, do you feel embarrassed if you cannot understand that people can judge you? These require position taking. You have to be aware that you are a separate individual and that other people can judge you and make their own opinions about you, that they have a mind of their own. So if I fall down the stairs and my pants fall off, right, I feel embarrassed because I'm aware that I'm a unique individual and that other people can have an opinion, a perception about me that is different from my own. And therefore I can feel embarrassed. But guilt, shame, pride, embarrassment, these things require self-awareness and theory of mind. The basic emotions do not require self-awareness or theory of mind. They are basic, meaning that you're born with them. They're like instincts. They occur naturally without any thought or learning. All right, that's a good place to stop.